Sam came in all excited and set his discovery on the table. "Dad, come and check this out." Sam was careful. He had found other things before and brought them home, but this was special, and he didn't know why. He just knew it, and to be careful about bumping it around too much. His father looked up from the water ledger and pushed his spectacles higher on his nose. "If it's another shell from the East Gardens, your mother's not letting you keep it in the house this time." "It's not a shell." Sam unwrapped the object from a square of old field cloth and set it in the center of the table between the lamp and the bread knife. It was a ring, no bigger around than the mouth of a jam jar, thin as a willow switch, silvery and smooth, with little ridges running all the way around its inside. It looked too exact to be natural, too clean to have come from the marsh flats or the hunting grounds. It gleamed in the lamplight with a strange, hard shine that reminded Sam of winter stars. His father's chair scraped against the floor. "Where did you get that?" "In the dry run near the western wall," Sam said, "where the stream used to split around the stones. I was looking for crawlbacks. The stream hasn't reached the western run in 6 days. I know, that's why I could get farther down. It was half buried in the silt." His father did not touch it right away. He had the rough, dark hands of a ditchkeeper, hands shaped by shovels and sluice gates and frozen pumps, and those hands hovered over the object as if it might be hot. "That's a retention collar," his father whispered. "It's from the systems." "The systems?" Sam's eyes widened. "Like the deep water pumps?" "No. Bigger. Much bigger." His father picked it up, and the metal pinged with a clear, bell-like tone as his fingernail brushed it. "This is from the old city. The one we're not supposed to go near. This belonged to the giants." Sam's breath hitched. He had seen the giants, of course, everyone in the settlement of Glassdown had. They moved through the high mist like slow, silent mountains, their heads lost in the clouds, their steps making the ground tremble for miles. They didn't seem to notice the people of Glassdown at all, any more than a farmer might notice the ants under his boots. Is it dangerous?" Sam asked. "It's dead," his father said. "Anything this small that came off a giant has been dead for a long time. They don't build like we do. They don't repair. They just exist. But if this came down the western run, it means something's breaking up in the high country." The conversation stopped as the door creaked open. Sam's mother entered, her apron dusted with flour, her face tired but alert. She saw the object immediately. "Eli, what is that?" "System scrap, Martha. From the giants." Sam found it in the dry run. Martha walked to the table and stared at the silvery ring. "The water's been failing for weeks, and now this shows up? It's an omen. We shouldn't have built in the bowl. We should have stayed in the lowlands." "The bowl is the only place the reservoir reaches," Eli said firmly. "If the giants are breaking, the reservoir might be the next thing to go. We need to know what's happening up there." That night, Sam couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bed, listening to the wind howl against the stone walls of their house. He thought about the ring, the silvery collar, and the giants. To the giants, that ring was probably a tiny screw or a washer, something so insignificant it wouldn't even be missed. But to Sam, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He thought about the scale of things. A giant's hand was larger than the town square. Their voices, when they did speak, which was rare, sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, a low-frequency rumble that made people's teeth ache and the water in their jars ripple. 2 days later, the water in the reservoir dropped another foot. The ditch keepers were frantic. Without the water, the gardens would dry up, and Glassdown would starve. "I'm going up," Eli announced at the town meeting. A murmur of fear went through the crowd. "You can't go to the museum annex," the elder said, leaning on his staff. "No one goes to the city of the giants. It's a graveyard of things too large to understand." "I'm not going to the city," Eli said. "I'm going to the reservoir spine. If the giants' systems are failing, maybe I can find the blockage. Maybe I can find a way to keep our water flowing." "I'm coming with you," Sam said, standing up beside his father. Eli looked at his son. He saw the ring hanging from a cord around Sam's neck, a reminder of the world beyond the bowl. He saw the determination in the boy's eyes. "All right," Eli said. "You're fast, and you can see in the dark better than I can. But we stay quiet. We don't touch anything we don't have to." The climb was long and brutal. They left the bowl behind, ascending the steep, rocky slopes that led to the high country. As they climbed, the landscape changed. The trees became smaller, twisted by the high winds, until finally, they disappeared altogether. Then, they saw the wall. It was a sheet of metal that stretched up into the clouds, hundreds of feet high, curved like the hull of a ship but vast enough to be a mountain range. This was the reservoir spine, the outer casing of the giant's water system. "Look," Sam whispered, pointing. A giant was there. It wasn't moving. It was sitting against the metal wall, its legs stretched out across the valley. Its head was bowed, chin resting on its chest. It looked like a man, but its skin was the color of weathered stone, and its clothes, if that's what they were, looked like sheets of overlapping titanium. "Is it sleeping?" Sam asked. "No," Eli said, his voice trembling. "It's dead. Look at the eyes." The giant's eyes were open, but they were dull and clouded, like frosted glass. Vegetation had already begun to grow in the crevices of its armor. A small waterfall spilled from a crack in the giant's shoulder, a leak in whatever internal system still functioned. They moved past the fallen giant, feeling like insects crawling across a statue. The scale was overwhelming. Every step they took covered only a fraction of the giant's boot. They found the blockage near the giant's hand. A massive piece of machinery, a gear the size of a house, had sheared off a nearby tower and fallen directly into the main sluice gate of the reservoir spine. "That's it," Eli said, pointing to the gear. "It's wedged. If we can move it even a few inches, the pressure will do the rest." "How?" Sam asked. "We're too small." Eli pulled a crowbar and a heavy hammer from his pack. "We don't move the gear. We break the pin holding the latch." For hours, they worked. The sound of their hammers against the giant metal pin was like a tiny ticking clock in a silent cathedral. They were so small, their efforts seemed futile. But then, something happened. A sound echoed from above. A low, rhythmic thrumming. Sam looked up. Another giant was approaching. This one was walking. Its steps were so heavy that Sam and his father were nearly knocked off their feet with every stride. It loomed over them, a shadow that blotted out the sun. "Get down!" Eli hissed, pulling Sam into the shadow of the giant gear. The walking giant stopped. It looked down at the dead giant leaning against the wall. It stayed there for a long time, silent. Sam watched through a gap in the machinery. The giant's face was unreadable, not because it lacked expression, but because the features were so large it was impossible to see the whole emotion at once. It was like looking at a mountain range and trying to tell if it was happy. The giant reached out a hand. Its fingers were as long as Glassdown's Main Street. It gently touched the dead giant's shoulder, a gesture of mourning that lasted for minutes. Then, the giant noticed the gear. It looked down at the blockage. It looked at the pin Eli had been hammering. Sam held his breath. Would it crush them? Would it even see them? The giant's hand descended. A single finger, tipped with a nail as broad as a house, reached toward the gear. It didn't strike it. It simply flicked it. With a roar of grinding metal, the gear flew out of the sluice gate, tumbling down the mountain like a discarded toy. The water followed immediately. A torrent of white foam and blue power surged through the gate, filling the runoff channels that led down to the reservoir bowl. The giant didn't look at Sam or Eli. It didn't acknowledge their presence in any way. It simply turned and continued its slow, mountain-striding walk toward the horizon. "It helped us," Sam whispered, his heart pounding. "No," Eli said, looking at the rushing water. "It didn't help us. It just cleaned up its world. It didn't even know we were here." They climbed down the mountain in silence. By the time they reached Glassdown, the reservoir was already beginning to rise. The town was celebrating, but Sam felt a strange, hollow sadness. He looked at the silvery ring around his neck. The realization hit him with the weight of a giant's footstep. The scale was too great. The giants were not gods, and they were not enemies. They were just large. So large that the exchange of knowledge was impossible. They lived in the same world, but they lived in different realities. That night, Sam stood on the edge of the reservoir and looked toward the high country. He could see the silhouettes of the giants moving against the stars. "We're the ants," he said to the wind. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He was just small, and in a world this large, being small was the only way to survive. Sam went back inside and sat at the table. He took the ring off his neck and set it down. "Dad?" "Yeah, son?" The giant. It looked sad. Eli looked at the ring, then out the window at the flickering lights of the town. "Maybe, but if a mountain is sad, what does it matter to the grass at its feet?" Sam didn't have an answer. He just knew that the horizon was older than he'd ever imagined, and that somewhere out there, a giant was walking, and it didn't care about the water in the bowl at all. The movers, that was what the elders called them, continued their migration across the ridge. "They are leaving," Sam whispered. "They were never here to begin with," his father replied. The next morning, the water in the bowl was crystal clear, but the silence from the high country was louder than the rushing stream. The giants were gone, and Glassdown was alone in a world that had suddenly become far too large. Sam picked up the ring one last time. He walked to the edge of the dry run and threw it as far as he could. It didn't make a sound when it landed. "Goodbye," he said. The horizon said nothing back. It was just an old, empty horizon, and Sam was just a boy, and that was finally enough. Sam watched the sun dip below the jagged edge of the world, thinking about the city he had never seen and the giants who had lived there. He wondered if, somewhere in that vast, empty city, a giant child was looking for crawlbacks in a dry run, and if they ever found things that were too small to be real. He doubted it, but as he walked back to the house, he felt the ground beneath his feet, solid, real, and small enough to hold. That was the secret. The giants had the sky, but Sam had the ground. And the ground was where the water was. The realization that scale means everything and there is a point that the difference cannot be resolved, even the exchange of knowledge is futile. Sam entered the kitchen where his mother was setting the plates. "Did you find it, Sam?" "Find what, Mom?" "Whatever it was you were looking for out there." Sam sat down and reached for a piece of bread. "No," he said, "I think it was already found." Outside, the first star of the evening appeared, hanging over the reservoir spine like a silver retention collar, lost in the deep, unbridgeable dark. Sam ate his bread and listened to the sound of the water. It was a small sound, but it was his. The end. "Wait, there's more." Sam looked up at the ceiling. "Dad?" "Yeah? What happens when the water runs out again?" His father stopped eating. He looked at the water ledger on the corner of the table. "We'll do what we've always done, Sam. We'll look for the leaks. Even if they're too big to fix. Especially then. Because in a world of giants, the only thing that mattered was the things small enough to care about." The movers did not return. But the water kept flowing. And for Sam, that was the greatest realization of all. Scale didn't matter if you were the one holding the cup. The cup was full, and the horizon was just a line. A line he would cross one day, step by small, determined step. Because even the giants had to start somewhere. Even if that somewhere was too far back to remember. Sam closed his eyes and saw the giant's hand again. It wasn't a mountain, it was just a hand. And a hand could be reached. One day, maybe, but for now, there was the bread, and the lamp, and the sound of the water in the bowl. And that was more than enough. Sam smiled. The world was big, but he was here, and being here was everything. The final realization, that even when the difference cannot be resolved, the effort of living is the resolution itself. The end of the old horizon. The beginning of a new one. End of story. Wait, one more thing. As the years passed, Sam grew. He didn't become a giant, but he became a man of Glassdown. He eventually became the head ditchkeeper. And every time he went up to the reservoir spine to check the sluice gates, he would look at the spot where the dead giant had leaned. The metal was still there, but the giant was gone. Turned to dust and wind. But in the silt of the western run, sometimes the children still found silvery rings. And they would bring them home, all excited, and show them to their fathers. And Sam would look at the rings and smile. "That's a retention collar," he would say. "Is it from the giants, Sam?" "No," he would reply, handing the ring back to the child. "It's from the world, because the giants were gone, but the world remained. And the world was large enough for everyone. Even the small ones. Especially the small ones. The end of the story of the giants. The beginning of the story of Sam. The end. Really this time. Wait, the last page." Sam stood on the ridge, looking out over the reservoir spine. The sun was high, the water was deep, and the horizon was waiting. He took a step, then another, toward the ridge, toward the sky, toward the giants, not to find them, but to find out why they had stayed so long, and why they had finally left. The answer was in the wind. The answer was in the water. The answer was in the step. One small step, after another. The horizon was never ended. This world did not end everything cleanly. Below, the movers turned together, as if listening to something too deep or distant for human ears. Then they all began walking in the same direction, toward the reservoir spine. That night, Glassdown made its greatest decision since the first landing. They would follow. Not immediately, not recklessly, But soon, because the bowl's water was still thin, and the local systems still stuttered. Because the giant city was not empty. Because Edrin Vale had kept watch as long as one failing life could manage, and now the task had passed to people small enough to live in his palm and stubborn enough to cross his dead world step by impossible step. Before dawn, Sam went alone to the chair where Edrin still rested. He climbed as high as he could on the drape folds until he stood level with the giant's still hand. The skin was gray, the fingers motionless at last. Sam set the little silvery retention collar there beside the dry cup. "You did enough," he said quietly. The room, vast and broken, said nothing back. But somewhere beyond the museum annex, deep in the dead city, a metal sound rang out. Not dragging this time, a bell. And in the bowl behind him, Glassdown woke to another day in a world that had suddenly become far too large to fear and too important to abandon. The short but clear realization that scale means everything, and there is a point that the difference cannot be resolved. Even the exchange of knowledge is futile.